our spectacular campsites on the most remote of tracks, to the workshop and everything in between. Your next episode of Great Off-Road Adventures is just seconds away. Hey guys, it's Graham from Great Off-Road Adventures here. Tonight we're out at Bells Rapids. It's quite close by to where we live, and the reason why we've come out here tonight is to run you through a time-lapse tutorial. So we're just going to do a real basic static time-lapse here tonight of the stars moving through. There's a couple points to consider with time-lapsing. I'm certainly no expert. I self-taught myself through YouTube, so I'm going to do my best to cover off how we do it. Technically, I don't know whether it's the most correct way of doing it, but it works for me. So if you guys want to know more about time-lapsing, or you want to know more advanced techniques and develop your skills, I'll just go and punch it into YouTube. There's a heap of information out there. Anyway, so in this video, we're just going to run you through how we do our basic nighttime time lapses where you get the stars moving through the sky. You need a few basic bits of camera gear to start off with. The first thing will be a tripod. Second thing will be a DSLR or a mirrorless camera that gives you manual control of the settings. So you need manual control of your ISO, your aperture and your shutter speed, because you need to lengthen the shutter speed and increase the ISO, open the aperture up to get the correct exposure for the long exposure that you need for nighttime time lapsing. A couple other bits that will obviously be important for the time lapse versus just the nighttime photo is you need an intervalometer. That's just a little remote that plugs into the side of your DSLR, or it's inbuilt into the camera itself. So on my Nikon DSLR, it's inbuilt, so I don't need to use a plug-in item. And all that does is you set it up to trigger the next photo at a certain interval. So if we're doing a 15-second exposure, I'd run a 20-second interval. So the photo gets triggered, the exposure is open for 15 seconds, then it has 5 seconds after the exposure stops to save that photo to the memory card, and then at the 20-second mark it starts that process again, and it'll do that for 300, 400, however many photos you elect to program into it. And then the last thing that will be pretty helpful, although it's not super essential, is a wide angle lens with a fast aperture. So I've got one of those. The three pieces of camera gear that I'll use tonight will be the tripod, the DSLR and the wide angle lens. So I'm just waiting for it to get a little bit darker, but it'll give me time to set the camera up, take a few photos, get my composition correct, and then we'll wait for the last bit of light to disappear, the stars to come out, and then we'll get into doing the time lapse. So one of the important things with time lapsing is to create a good composition. So as cool as it is to watch the stars move through the night sky, one of the other important things is to have a feature, something else happening. So normally around camp we'll have obviously the cars there, maybe a little campfire going, people walking around. It just adds a bit of an extra dimension to the time lapse. It's one of those things that takes from a good time lapse to a great time lapse. I've taken plenty of good time lapses, but I reckon I can count on one hand how many great time lapses I've taken. They're the ones that definitely stick in your head. They're the ones that you want to use in all your projects, and they're the ones that a lot of you guys have seen that you've gone, wow, that looked really cool, how do we do that? And that's why I'm here obviously making the video. So I've had a little bit of a look around and decided that this will be my composition for the night. My considerations for tonight is that the full moon will rise at 1 o'clock in the morning, and with pretty much sun setting at 7:30, the last bit of light and glow from the horizon will dissipate about 8 o'clock, 20 past 8. So that gives me a 3-hour, 4-hour window of the time lapse for the time lapse, which is plenty of time. because we are within the sort of confines of the city, we're quite close to Perth, we do have light pollution. So that's where the lights from the city is going to just make a ball of light in the sky, and you're not going to get the fine detail of the stars through that light. Because of that, we're going to point the camera to the east, because that's where it's darkest for us. Perth's behind, or to the west of us. And it's also going to be darker there sooner, and it will have the stars rising up through the shot. So we're pointing east-northeast with the camera. We've got this log and the water in our foreground of the shot, and then obviously the midground of the hills and the top of the shot, and the background will be the stars moving through the sky. So set the camera up here. I'm just going to quickly take a few composition shots. I'll leave the light from the car on for now, but we'll turn that off when we go and do the time lapse. So these are just composition shots to work out what's going to look good in terms of, you know, where the log is in the shot, the water, the sky. And then when it gets a bit darker, we'll take our actual test shots where we're looking for exposure. And then when we're happy with all that, we'll just trigger the time lapse, and then we'll go and sit down for a bit. So we'll just quickly do some composition shots. I think I've aced it in one with the composition shot. We've got a bit of reflection from the log on the water there. We've got this log in front. We've got plenty of sky for the stars. So I'm going to leave that how it is. And we'll just set the chairs up, make ourselves comfortable for a little bit. And then we'll come back to you in 20 minutes, a half hour, once we've got a bit more action happening in the sky. Well, whilst we wait for the conditions to obviously develop, there's a few considerations and a few points I'm going to talk to you about. One of them is your time-lapse duration, so how many photos you need for your time-lapse. The way it works is if you film in PAL or NTSC, you're going to either work on derivatives of 25 or 30. So PAL is 25 frames per second, NTSC is 30 frames per second. So I do all my work in PAL / 25 frames per second. The main reason why is because of time lapses. If you think about a 10-second time lapse and you need 25 frames per second, 10 seconds times 25, 250 frames of photos. Now think about that for NTSC, you need 300. So there you got to take an extra 50 photos, store an extra 50 photos, edit an extra 50 photos for the same 10-second time lapse. So the things to consider is you can take the 300 photos, use it at 25 frames per second and get a 12-second time lapse. So you can get more duration from your time lapses by shooting in PAL instead of NTSC. And when you put it onto YouTube, it converts it all to 25 frames per second anyway. Certainly in my experience it does. Or derivatives of 25. Australia uses PAL as its standard, I believe. So when you view it on a TV and that sort of thing, it's not an issue. PAL and NTSC, the 25 and 30 comes around from the 50 hertz and 60 hertz that you get with your mains power, and it's to not get a black screen on the TV. It's to have a different frames per second to the hertz reading. So that's how that come about. So for me, I like to work on, at a minimum, the shortest time lapse I like is 10 seconds. I liked them to be more around the 16 to 18 second, 20 second mark. So I'm looking at, 500 photos to get 20 seconds of time lapse. A good interval that I sort of work on to get a good sort of movement speed from the stars is about a 20-second interval, 15 to 20 seconds. So that's between the start of one photo and the start of the next photo. Obviously, if we're in a really dark area with no moon, no ambient light, no surrounding light, no campfire, my actual exposure will need to be up around the 20-second mark, and then I'll need to actually have a longer interval, like 25 seconds or 30 seconds. All that means is it takes longer for your camera to take the 500 photos. It takes longer to take the time lapse. Now, we're getting close to being able to do our test shots on the time lapse, and there's a couple other points I need to talk to you about quick, and that is understanding how a DSLR works. So you need to understand how the exposure works and what ISO means. So that's just the sensitivity of the sensor. The aperture, which is the opening of the lens, how much light comes in. Imagine it like the pupil in your eye. When it's very bright, your pupil constricts in. When it's you're in a dark area like a cave or the lights are out, your pupil opens up. And then the last thing is the shutter speed. So that's just how long the shutter's held open for. Those three factors dictate the exposure. And then the last thing that you have to know how to do is to lock the white balance on your camera so that all your photos are taken with the same white balance. But when we go into the editing software back home on the computer, we'll be changing the white balance slightly anyway. So out here tonight, I'll have it on like a fluorescent setting for the white balance, and the rest of the settings we'll get when we go and take our test photos in a second. Well, we got the composition set up before, and now it's gotten nice and dark and the stars are starting to come out. There's a few things you got to do to get the time lapse to run smoothly that I found. The first thing is obviously to lock your lens on manual focus. So I've just done that with mine. And then you've got to get it set for the infinity focus mark, which that can take a little bit of mucking around to do. If your lens doesn't have a focus mark on it, the best thing you can do is actually shine it on a light source, like the lights on my car, from about 50 meters away. If that means walking away, then that'll focus on that point, lock it then, and that'll be set for infinity focus. And then the last thing that I've got to do is just lock my white balance. So I'm going to do that now. And we'll go and kill the lights on the back of the car, and we'll take some test photos quick. We'll add a piece of equipment to the checklist, and that's a head torch. You'll find it'll be invaluable for looking at your camera, finding the buttons and stuff in the dark. I'll take my first test shot, 400 ISO, f2.8, with a 5 second shutter speed. And we'll see how it looks now. So it looks pretty good. We've lost a little bit of detail in the dark areas. It's probably slightly too dark for my likings. So what I'll do there is I'll look to increase the shutter speed a little bit. So I'll probably increase it out to about 10 seconds. Take a quick test shot. Looking at that, we've got good detail in the stars and good detail on the log and whatnot in front of us. We're still losing a little bit on the hills in the background, but there's not a lot of light there, so that's to be expected. I'm pretty happy with those settings. What I will do though is I'm going to raise my ISO a little. So I'm actually going to bring it up to 800 ISO and come back down to a 6-second shutter speed. That's a pretty similar exposure to where I was before, but it's a 4-second quicker shutter, so I'll be able to get through the photos of the time lapse quicker. So I was doing a quick test photo. All the test photos we've taken so far have been completely unedited, haven't touched them up in Lightroom at all. Well, now that we've done our test photos, I'll turn the light back on. We've obviously got the lens locked in manual. We've got our composition set up. We've got our actual exposure set up. So from here, we've got the white balance locked in. We've got the settings and everything dialed in. The last thing we have to do is actually just program how many photos we want, and then obviously work out how long that's going to take. So I'm using a 6-second shutter speed, 6-second exposure. So I will set up for a 10-second interval. So over a course of a minute, I'll take 6 photos. And then at 500 photos, you can go back and work out how long that's going to take them all. So yeah, we're pretty much set up to go. I'm pretty happy with how it's all laid out and what we're going to capture. Hopefully it's going to look good when we get back to the computer. But really now it's time for me to go and have dinner, let the DSLR do its thing, and we'll see you back in the office on the computer. Welcome back to the office, everyone. This is obviously where we're going to go into the detail of how to edit your time-lapse, night-lapse photos, or nighttime photography photos in general. So we're going to jump onto the computer now. I'm going to record a few bits with the screen recording and go through sort of step by step how I'd quickly edit the photos for that night lapse that we took. So let's jump into it right now. Well guys, the software that I use to edit all my photos, whether they are static photos or time lapses, is Adobe Lightroom Classic. So what I found, this is paid software, and as with everything, the stuff that you have to pay for is always better. So I found it worthwhile to invest in getting this good software. So let's start out by importing the photos from our time lapse. I've already taken them off the memory card, put them onto the hard drive in the computer. So we just need to import them. So obviously go File, Import, select Source, Other Source, because it's not in a normal directory. Under Videos, where I do all my video work, I have my night lapse. Under Photos, I have my test photos, then obviously I have my time lapse. So we want to import the time lapse folder. And as you can see here, all the photos we took. There's 447 of them. I think I programmed the time lapse to do 500, and my battery ran out halfway through, so we got slightly less. But I've got no specific import preferences, so we'll just import them all. This could take a little while if you're on a slower machine. Mine is pretty good. So the best thing I found to do is find a photo towards the middle of your time lapse. So about here, and go across the develop module. This is the photo in its native sort of look before adding any tweaks and corrections to it. So bear with me here. I'm probably going to go through this a bit fast, but it's a bit dark, so I'm going to raise the exposure up a little bit. It's quite red, so I want to add a bit of blue, and I also want to bring some of the pink out of it. I want to add a bit of contrast, not too much though. The highlights are going to affect the log, so I actually want to dull those down a little bit. The shadows are going to affect the darker areas, so bring that up. You can see the effect it has over here with the reflection of the log. So no highlights, or no shadows, more shadows. So we want a bit more detail on the shadows so you can see that reflection. As for the whites, again, they're going to target the lighter areas of photos. I don't want to do too much there. I do want to try and bring up some detail in the black. Not too much though, you can see it starts to get grainy. You can just make out a bit of detail on the hills there. Add a bit of clarity, it helps define the stars. And now I'm just changing how bright and vibrant the colours are. It's not a vital step, but it is helpful. So that's a basic colour correction. I just do one more step where I actually highlight that specific top half of the photo. And what I do by doing that is I just edit that top section. So cool it a little bit more, add a little bit more blue, a little bit more exposure to make the stars pop out, and more contrast to take the night sky away. Bring up a little bit in the highlights. Shadows, you can bring probably down a touch. Again, like to add a little bit of clarity, not too much. Bring out detail in the stars. So that's a very, very basic sort of look at it. I will quickly show you what they look like before editing, after editing. You can see why it's worth putting that little bit of effort in to make it look better. We've got more definition on the bush here, more definition on the hill, and obviously the tree line, and then obviously the shadow and the detail, the reflection off of the water here. So definitely worthwhile putting in a little bit of effort to your photo. Anyway, what you need to do now is obviously apply these corrections to all the photos that you took in your sequence. The easiest thing I found to do is using your keyboard shortcut, Control A. It highlights all the photos that you've imported, so your entire time lapse. Click on the one that you've been editing here, and then use your sync key. You want to sync everything that you've done, so every correction, every white balance, all of this you need to sync. Include the crop, so check all, synchronize. What we'll see now is all the other photos will have those same changes applied to them. So it'll look like the same sort of photo, and when you play it, you'll see it all move. So with all the photos highlighted and all the changes applied, next thing you need to do is export them. So I'm going to export them to the same folder as the original photo. I'll put them into a subfolder, the location, which is called Lightroom Edit, and I'll rename them to Timelapse Tutorial -1, and then obviously the next photo will be -2, -3. And that is an important step to do, because when you come across to add them into Premiere Pro to play them as a video, you need them to be in a numerical order. So the first photo in your time lapse needs to be numbered 1, and the last photo needs to obviously be, and they need to follow in numerical order. JPEG, because we've done the editing now, max quality. I resize mine in Premiere Pro. I'm not going to include any watermarks because it's playing the video, so I have to worry about any of that. So they're the basic export settings. The biggest thing is just to know where to find it and to make sure that you put it in numerical order in a sequence. Beyond that, I'll hit export. I'll come back to you in a few minutes once I finish exporting. It does take a little while, especially with this many photos. Well guys, welcome back. We've jumped across from Lightroom. Now that all the photos have exported, we've jumped into Premiere Pro, which is obviously the editing software we turn your photos into a time lapse itself. So I'll actually include them as part of this time lapse. So this is the actual project that I'm editing that you are now watching. So the first thing you have to do is obviously go across to your project. In here, I've just got some bins. They're like folders. So one of them there is videos. Here, I want to right-click, import. Obviously, go and find the directory where you exported your photos to. So it was the same folder location for me under time-lapse and then under a subfolder Lightroom Edit. This is the importance of having them in a numerical order. So I just select that first photo and I tick this image sequence box. And what it'll do is every photo that follows it in numerical order, it will import at the same time and it will automatically turn it into a video for you, a video clip with your 25 frames per second and everything in there. So it's literally that simple. Just make sure that your photos are in numerical order all the way down and it's going to do all the hard work for you. So let's watch the magic happen. And there you see it's come in as a JPEG, but it's showing it as 17 seconds and 22 frames long. So it's that simple. We just drag that across here. The reason why it's zoomed in, sorry, I'm going to need to just adjust this for you so you can see what I mean. There we go. The reason why it's zoomed in is because this rectangle here is 1920 by 1080 pixels and the photo is 6000 pixels by 4000 pixels. So we just need to actually edit the image properties and reduce its scale. So I generally reduce it to about 33%. Any less and you start to get black edges down each side, as you can see there. So 33 is the magic number for my camera. You just need to muck around and play with that yourself. Now, if we started at the beginning, you'll see the time lapse develop. It takes a little bit to go through. So what I'm going to do now is actually just render through this area. So I'm just going to select an in point and an out point. Render it so that it plays back more smoothly for you, and obviously then at that point I will demo what the time lapse looks like. Well, you've got to love the power of video editing. This time lapse render took about 2-3 minutes and now I've been able to speed it up into about 10 seconds. It is handy, that's for sure. Well, there you go, the rendering is complete. And you can see the time lapse playing before your eyes right now. What I'll do is I will play the time lapse again in full screen right after this clip finishes. Obviously, your time lapse is no good with just boring old video, so I would recommend adding a bit of background music to it. Again, depending what you're using your project for, where you're going to broadcast it, you can get away with any old music off YouTube, or you can go and find the free library where you have less copyright concerns and all that. So yeah, anyway, cue the time lapse now with some music. everyone, I hope you found that video useful. It's obviously not a video type that I would normally produce. I'm normally all about being out in the bush and showing you our adventures, but there was a lot of demand for the time lapses, so I've done my best. I've shown you step by step how we go about setting up the camera, taking the photos, and now editing them. Now remember, I am self-taught, so technically I don't know whether my procedures are sound or they're done the correct way, but I'm happy with the results that I get probably 95% of the time. You always get duds and you only get better with practice, so the best thing I can say is get out there, have a few goes. Trust me, you'll know when you're getting good results, and obviously just try and remember that for the next time round. Now I'm going to include a couple links in the description of the video on tutorials that I followed when I was starting out that I found particularly useful. So if you want some more information, I suggest going and checking them out. Anyway guys, that wraps up the video. Happy safe adventuring. Hopefully we'll see you in another one. If you found the video useful, make sure you subscribe, give me a like, drop your comments in the comments below. Happy to help you guys out. So take care, we'll see you next time.